Today is what? Today's Dalet Kislev, the fourth day of the month of Kislev. Just for the record, in the year that I got married, Dalet Kislev was on Shabbos. And we got married the Monday after. So this Shabbos will be 35 years since we're married, Baruch Hashem. No complaints, we're good. I have to be careful what I say over here. Even if you weren't here, I would say it. Even if you weren't here. Anyway, so which means that we're a few days away from Tes Kislev. Tes Kislev was the birthday and the yahrzeit of the Mitteler Rebbe. He's the only one of the Chabad Rebbeim who literally had, like the Gemara says, tzaddikim have perfect lives. He lived 54 years to the day. He was born in 1773 and he passed away in 1827. 54 years to the day. The next day, Yud Kislev, was his Chag HaGeula, the day that he was released from prison. And one of the reasons why the Mitteler Rebbe's Chag HaGeula is not celebrated like the Alter Rebbe's Chag HaGeula celebrated, because he passed away before the Geula was complete. That's the story. He passed before the Geula was complete. So I'm supposed to talk about Mitteler Rebbe, but I have the option of talking about any part of the Mitteler Rebbe's life that I choose. That's the advantage that I have. And what I'm going to talk to you about is his arrest and liberation. That's our topic. The story of how the Mitteler Rebbe was arrested and liberated. The Mitteler Rebbe presided over Chassidim after a war. He became a Rebbe in 1814, which was right after the war between Russia and France. Wars are very destructive. Wars destroy property, war destroys businesses, war destroys families, war destroys everything. When the Mitteler became a Rebbe, his Chassidim were incredibly poor. Life was very, very hard, and it took them a lot of time and effort to rebuild their lives. We have much evidence that the Mitteler Rebbe did a lot of things to try to help his Chassidim out of the difficult situations, including literally build communities for farmers to live where they can have comfortable parnasa. He relocated 2,000 families Chassidim, which in those days was an enormous number of people. To a place called Kherson, which is in the Ukraine, where they had comfortable parnasa. And they would live comfortably in the Ukraine till the Holocaust, well over 100 years. But the Mitteler personally was at a terrible disadvantage. Why? Because when the war with Napoleon started, Alter Rebbe ran away. Why did he run away? He didn't want to be under Napoleon's jurisdiction even for 1 minute. And just to add insult to injury, what did the Alter Rebbe do before he left Liadi? He burned his house to the ground. So when the Alter Rebbe passed away, there was no place to go back to. There was no home. And the Mitteler Rebbe literally had to figure out where he was going to live. But you have to remember something. The Alter Rebbe was supporting his entire family. Alter Rebbe had 6 children. He had 3 boys and 3 girls. All married with children of their own. Some of whom had children who were married. In other words, you were dealing with a very big family, and for the most part, they all lived in Liadi around the Alter Rebbe, and the Alter Rebbe was responsible for all of them financially. Just for one example, that Tzemach Tzedek was the Alter Rebbe's grandson. He was the Mitteler Rebbe's son-in-law. The Mitteler Rebbe was supported by the Alter Rebbe. Mitteler Rebbe only learned in Daven, and the Tzemach Tzedek also did basically the same thing. So the Alter Rebbe had to provide financial support for many people. The number that is brought is that the Alter Rebbe's family was 60 strong, 60 people. 60 people is how many men and how many women and how many children? It's a lot. It's a lot of people. Now, I'm not saying that every single member of the Alter Rebbe's family lived with him personally, but enough did. Now the Alter Rebbe passes away. So for lack of words, the breadwinner is gone. The one who was supposed to make the money to support the family was gone. And there's no house. There's no place to live. There's no center. So after the Alter Rebbe passed away, the Mitteler Rebbe did something which many Hasidic Rebbes did. It was a way of Pashut making money. The Yiddish expression is Gefahren ibn Medina. He traveled all over Russia. He came to every city. It was a brand new Rebbe. Mitteler was a brand new Rebbe. And in so many ways, he was different than the Alter Rebbe. People came to see him. They wanted to see him. They wanted to hear his Chasidus. And of course, they wanted to meet him in Yechidus. They wanted brachas. They wanted eitzes. They wanted help. And of course, when you come to a Rebbe and you get all the support that a Rebbe provides, you leave money. That's how many Rebbes made parnasa. When life was difficult, they would travel. They would go from place to place, and there was a way of earning extra parnasa. Meaning to say, if the Rebbe sits in his house and you come to him, you're likely to give him a smaller check than if he comes to your town. We know that by the Tzemach Tzedek had to marry with one of his daughters, and he called in his daughter and says that he doesn't have enough money for a fur coat. How important for her is it to have a fur coat? She says, I don't need it. So he said to her, if you would insist on having the fur coat, I would have to travel, and because you don't need it, I can stay home, and I appreciate the fact that you're saving me the tirche of traveling. This was a tradition. So the Mitteler Rebbe traveled to many, many cities. He met many, many people, and he raised a lot of money. How much money did he raise? He raised 35,000 ruble. 35,000 ruble the year after the end of a terrible war was a substantial amount of money. After he raised the money, he appointed a committee of 2 or 3 people. I forgot how many, but we know their names. And he said to them, you are responsible to distribute the money. So every one of the Alter Rebbe's children and grandchildren who was married was given a lump sum. Some were given 500 ruble, some were given 1,000 ruble. It was a lot of money. I don't know how much 500 ruble was then, but it was not $50. It was like the equivalent of tens of thousands of dollars today. Depending on the size of your family, you either given 500 ruble and 1,000 ruble. This money was seed money. It was a way to start your life after all of the difficulties that they had been through. You could see the list. The list is available. It's printed in a book now. They found it. I always like to say Russia is a utopia. Russia, Soviet Union is the perfect society. In Russia, you have everything in the world. There's one thing that Russia doesn't have, and it's a big miracle that it doesn't have it. Russia does not have any paper shredders. There are documents that were found now in Russian archives that talk about the Baal Shem Tov as physically living. Papers, documents that are 350 years old. You can find documents describing the Baal Shem Tov as a living person, paying taxes or not paying taxes, belonging to the municipality. The Baal Shem Tov is registered in his town as a doctor of all things. But they have, in other words, they didn't throw anything away. They found in Russia a complete file, several hundred pages of the Mitteler Rebbe's case when he was arrested, liberated, and they printed it, the whole thing in Hebrew. They translated it from Russian into Hebrew, and you can see the evolution of the story. The Mitteler Rebbe raised this money, and he gave it out to all of his members of his family, and then he moved back to Lubavitch. He was living in Liadi, which is far away, and he moved back to Lubavitch. Lubavitch, for those who do not know, is very close to Lyozne, where the Alter Rebbe was born. The Alter Rebbe was a Rebbe for most of his life. You could literally walk from Lyozne to Liadi. It's like 7 or 8 miles. You could walk. It's very close. And he settled in Lubavitch. And Lubavitch became the hub of Chassidim for the next 100 years plus. Now here's what happened. The Mitteler Rebbe raised this money, and he organized people to distribute the money. One of the people who organized and distributed the money was a chassid by the name of Rabbi Pinchas Reizes. He was a big chassid, a very big chassid. He was also very rich. And he was very close to the Alter Rebbe, incredibly close to the Mitteler Rebbe. And he was authorized with 2 other people to distribute the funds. He passed away without children. The one thing he didn't have was children. He died without children. His relatives were all looking forward to getting his wealth. They knew he was very rich. They knew he had enough kids, so they figured they'll inherit his estate. You know, this Pinchas Reizes had these big houses, had these big businesses. They figured they're going to inherit his estate. And there was, as the expression is, the vultures were circling, waiting for Pasha to die to collect his wealth. He died, and they looked at his estate, and there wasn't a penny. He gave everything away he had to tzedakah. And most of the money that he had, he actually gave to the Mitteler Rebbe. Mitteler Rebbe had many causes. The Mitteler Rebbe supported Moses and Eretz Yisrael a lot. The Mitteler Rebbe supported Chassidim in Russia. He had all kinds of activities, and he raised a lot of money, and he gave away a lot of money. So the Pinchas Reizes left all of his wealth to tzedakah, and especially to the Mitteler Rebbe. The Pinchas Reizes' relatives were very upset. They felt that they were entitled to a piece of the wealth, and they felt that the Pinchas Reizes giving it away was wrong. So they came to the Mitteler Rebbe and said to the Mitteler Rebbe, we want a kickback. What a kickback means. We're his relatives. We really should have gotten the whole estate. I don't know why he didn't give it to us. They came to the Mitteler Rebbe and said, give us some of the money. Our rich uncle, our rich cousin died, left with millions of rubles. We're entitled to some of it. And the Mitteler Rebbe said, he didn't give the money to me. He gave the money to tzedakah. It's not my money. It's tzedakah money, and I have to distribute it equitably, responsibly. and I can't give you a penny. So they told the Mitteler Rebbe that if they're not going to give him some of the money back, they're going to create a mesida, a libel, and they're going to go to the government and make his life difficult. And the Mitteler Rebbe wasn't exactly frightened. The Mitteler Rebbe said, that with all due respect, first of all, I'm not afraid of you. And second of all, even if you were frightening with me, that doesn't allow me to take stocker money and give it to you as a kickback because you decided that you want to extort me. So that's exactly what they did. They created a libel that had no basis, in fact, none, against the Mitteler Rebbe. The sad part of the story was that they joined forces with relatives of the Mitteler Rebbe. For those who do not know, the Alter Rebbe's wife, whose name was Rebbetzin Stenne, the Mitteler Rebbe's mother, came from a very, very rich family who were misnagdim, big misnagdim. Some of them eventually gained great respect for the Alter Rebbe, but some of them remained very jealous. The Mitteler Rebbe was their cousin. And they joined together with Pinchas Reiser's relatives, who had a beef because they wanted some of the money, and they made up a Baba Maisa about the Mitteler Rebbe, which basically meant that the Mitteler Rebbe was using money irresponsibly. He was extorting money, he was taking money from his chassidim that they didn't have, and that he was using the money to, as they say, to fatten his own wallet, to make himself rich, and that the government has to examine how the Mitteler Rebbe handles stocker money. That was the libel, basically. The fact that he was supporting a yishuv in Eretz Yisrael also wasn't good because Russia and Turkey, which was at that time the owners of Eretz Yisrael, were always at odds. So they made up this whole thing that his involvement in Eretz Yisrael, also the same kind of thing that they said by the Alter Rebbe. But they needed proof. How do you bring proof that the Mitteler Rebbe is stealing money from his chassidim and using it recklessly? So they found a letter in the Pinchas Reiser's estate, which we now have. You can see the letter, the copy of the letter, but you see the letter precisely. It's a little bit different than the version of the story which was published years ago in the Sefer Beis Rebbe. The Mitteler Rebbe says, I raised 35,000 ruble and I gave out a quarter. I told you this before. The Pinchas Reiser was a Gabbai Tzedakah. He was involved in the Mitteler Rebbe's activities. The Mitteler Rebbe wrote him, I raised $35,000 and I gave out a quarter. But it's written in Hebrew, and it's written in the kind of way that could very easily be read to mean, I raised money and I gave out 35,000 ruble, which is a quarter. You see the difference? If the Mitteler Rebbe raised 35,000 ruble and gave out a quarter, that's about 9,000 ruble. But if he raised money and gave out 35,000, which is a quarter, that means he raised 140,000 ruble. 140,000 ruble in 1813 to raise that kind of money was impossible. It meant that every chassid had to literally bankrupt himself. And they came to the government with this piece of paper and said, look what kind of rabbi this is. He extorts money from his chassidim. He lives high on the hog. He lives like a rich man. The chassidim are very poor. He doesn't care about them. And he's like this king who takes advantage of people, and he thinks only about himself. That was the libel. That was the mesida. They were claiming that the Mitteler Rebbe is irresponsible. He is what they call in English. It's a great English word. Impropriety. Impropriety means gneva, but it's a lawyer word. Impropriety, financial improprieties. This was the libel. The whole thing was not true. But the Russians, Bechlal, are paranoid people, and they don't like Jews, Befrat. So the government invited the Mitteler Rebbe to come to Vitebsk for an investigation. He wasn't arrested. He was invited to come to Vitebsk to examine his financial situation. Now, first of all, the Mitteler Rebbe was not taken to the capital of the country. The Alter Rebbe was in Petersburg, in Petersburg, what's now called Leningrad. I think it's called Petersburg again, which is on the Baltic Sea. I was in Petersburg. I actually was in the fortress where the Alter Rebbe was held. The Peter Republic, I was there 35 years ago. Today they made a museum out of it. When I was there, they wouldn't let me into any rooms, but I was there. The Mitteler Rebbe was taken to Vitebsk. Vitebsk was like Albany, the capital of the state, the gubernia in which Lubavitch was. And sometimes it's called the Mogilov gubernia, Mohilov in Russian, and sometimes it's called the Vitebska gubernia. Gubernia means a state. I don't know how it could sometimes be Mogilov and sometimes Vitebsk, but that's the fact. Sometimes Lubavitch is part of the state of Vitebsk, on the state of Mogilov. Bottom line is the Mitteler Rebbe was sent a message that people are saying that he's irresponsible with money, and he has to come to Vitebsk to explain his financial dealings. And he went. Mitteler Rebbe went. He left after Simchas Torah. We don't know exactly when, but he was sometime in Cheshvan, maybe the beginning of Kislev even. He left Lubavitch and he traveled. Every place he came to, Chassidim came out to greet him. And there was a big Fabrengen, and he said Chassidus. And the police who were accompanying him were like getting very disturbed. Here's this man who's being accused of being a Ganev, and wherever he comes, they give him so much covet. And so many people come to see him, and he's Fiat HaMelucha. The whole thing of it, the way the Mitteler Rebbe was acting, and the way the Petterborg, the way the Vitebsk enhanced, it made them feel more angry at him, if you will. He was behaving like a Rebbe, he wasn't acting like a prisoner. He came to Vitebsk, and he was held, and he was given places to stay in the homes of the government, and he stayed there for a few weeks. During the time, he had to explain his finances, what he did with his money. And there was an actual trial. There was actually a trial. Now, we don't know everything about that trial, but we know some about the trial. First of all, appreciate the fact the basic trial was that he's taking too much money of people who can't afford to give it, and that he's spending the money in a way which is not responsible. He's living very happy and free and pleasuresome when people are around him or giving him the money, you're having such a hard time. The Mitteler Rebbe didn't like it. The Mitteler Rebbe felt like his space was invaded. Like his privacy was invaded. The Mitteler Rebbe did not want to have to explain to Goyim how he spends money. It was none of their business. Because the Mitteler Rebbe had all kinds of considerations. But they squeezed him. They made him uncomfortable. He really didn't like it. He stayed in Vitebsk just for a few weeks. During that time, there were all kinds of sessions where the other side came with their proofs and their arguments and their witnesses, whatever they did. And of course, our side came with our proofs. So there's a few details that we know that I think are kind of interesting. Probably the most important is the following. The Mitteler Rebbe wrote a letter to the governor of the state of Vitebsk, a goy. That letter was written in Hebrew. It's a long letter. It's now translated. I'm sure it's translated into Russian. It was probably translated into Russian for the goy, but we have it in Hebrew. It was published years ago in a little pamphlet called Bad Kodesh. That was printed in the Mitteler Rebbe's Igros Kodesh. It's a long letter. In this letter, the Mitteler Rebbe explains to him what Chassidus is. It's based on the Alter Rebbe's cross-examination. When the Alter Rebbe was in jail, he was asked also many questions, and he had to explain what Chassidus is. The Mitteler Rebbe took part of what the Alter Rebbe wrote when he was arrested and rewrote it and explained it better for this guy to read about what Chassidus is. But the point of writing that letter was he writes to the gubernator, to the governor, to the state head of Vitebsk or whatever it is, Mogilov, where the Mitteler Rebbe presided, that he's asking that he should personally judge his case. Whenever you have a trial, the government has to provide a judge. The government has many judges at its disposal. Every time a case comes to the courts appoint a judge to oversee that case. So the Mitteler Rebbe wrote a letter asking the governor of the state of Vitebsk to personally be his judge, which he did. And part of the reason he did this, the Mitteler Rebbe writes that if you have a bigger judge, you have a bigger malach. If a bigger malach, you have a greater likelihood that the truth will come out. He writes, I want you to judge my case because I trust that if you judge my case, the truth will emerge. And that's how it played out. This is one detail that we know. Another detail which is very interesting, and I'm sharing this with you because I think girls need to hear this. The Mitteler Rebbe had 7 daughters and 2 sons. The Tzemach Tzedek had 7 sons and 2 daughters. The Mitteler Rebbe's daughters were very beautiful and they were very powerful. They had characters, they were really strong personalities. We know about the Mitteler Rebbe's daughter who was married to the Tzemach Tzedek, that she was a personality. She and the Tzemach Tzedek, it was an interesting marriage. They were very strong characters, very, very strong characters. One of the Mitteler Rebbe's daughters acted as his lawyer. One of his daughters came every day to the court and defended her father, and she spoke Russian well, she was very presentable, and she did what she had to do to protect her father's interests. She realized at a certain point that the guy was delaying the verdict because he liked to look at her. She was pretty. It took her a while to chapsach that the guy was schlepping because he liked when she would come and stand in front of him. So she never came again. She never came again. No, in America you use that as an advantage. She sent somebody in her place. She didn't need that, you know. It's a detail which I think girls need to hear. She avoided it. The end of the story was that they were arguing that the Mitteler Rebbe is a ganef, basically. And the Mitteler Rebbe side was saying that this is nonsense, this is ridiculous. And it was dragging on and dragging on and dragging on. So finally the Mitteler Rebbe said, you know what, I'm going to go myself and I'm going to defend myself. And the Mitteler Rebbe said to the court, on this and this date, I'm going to come and I'm going to speak for myself. The Mitteler Rebbe put on his big day Shabbos, he put on the Shabbos clothes. And the way you see in the picture that Tzemach Tzedek is wearing white, it was silk, white shtreimel, head to toe white. All the first three Rebbes of Chabad dressed that way on Shabbos. The Alter Rebbe dressed that way. On Shabbos and Yom Tov they wore white, they even wore white shoes. They were white head to toe. The Alter Rebbe dressed that way, the Mitteler Rebbe dressed that way, and the Tzemach Tzedek dressed that way. The Rebbe Maharash did it. Sometimes the Rebbe Rashab said he's not on that madrega, he discontinued this minute. But the Mitteler Rebbe walked into that courtroom, it looked like a Kohen Gadol. He looked gorgeous. He looked so good that they were afraid that the judge would feel like he's showing him up, like he looks better than he does. And he came into the courtroom, he made an enormous impression. That's the way he walked in. And he had a showdown, he had a direct confrontation with the other side. And I don't know if he was talking to one of his relatives or one of Pinchas Rei's relatives, doesn't matter. But it was somebody who knew him. The extortionists, the other side, were not strangers. They knew who the Mitteler Rebbe was. Some of them were Pashut family members. And others were the relatives of one of his greatest Hasidim. He knew who they were. And the Mitteler Rebbe started to push back. You know, he doesn't sit there like a Nebuchadnezzar. He started to argue that this whole thing is nonsense. And you're making it up. And you're doing it because you're angry. He defended himself. And it went on for a while, and at some point, the Mitteler was pushing back with words on this person who was accusing him of being a ganef, and he was looking stupid. So the guy blurted out, "Oh, but the Rebbe, how could you say this, that?" So the Mitteler Rebbe turns around to the judge and says, he calls me a thief, and then he calls me a Rebbe. In one said he'll be a ganef, then he calls me a Rebbe, a Ravin. And he looked terrible. The other side looked so bad that the judge threw the case out. He just threw it out. This is one of the terms they use in legal cases. When you come to a court to present a prosecution, you want to try somebody, if the judge doesn't think you have enough evidence, he just throws it out. After the Mitteler Rebbe's confrontation with his opposition, the judge threw the case. Finish, get away, this is nonsense. He threw it away. He told the Mitteler Rebbe's relatives, the Pinchas Rei's relatives, to go home and fly a kite, and he told the Mitteler Rebbe, go home to Lubavitch, it's finished. And that's what happened. There was a problem. The problem was the government didn't really mean it. They got rid of the other side. But now the other side became the government itself. The government began to meddle in the Mitteler Rebbe's affairs. Not that the government felt that the Mitteler Rebbe was a ganef, but there was an opportunity. Russia was a very anti-Semitic country. And it wasn't a democracy, it was an autocracy. You did whatever you wanted. And they began to meddle in the Mitteler Rebbe's affairs, push it to bother him, to control them. You know, they were afraid of the Alter Rebbe, they wanted to control them. So they had a way in, and started to mix, they started to show us your books, auditing. There was no accusation, the accusation was gone, but they still meddled. And they bothered him, and they bothered him, and they bothered him, and they bothered the Mitteler Rebbe. Really did not like it. And it didn't stop after he passed away. In fact, there is an official document which closes the case completely, where the government said, yeah, you're a tzaddik, you're innocent, literally a few days after the Mitteler Rebbe's talks. And it's probably true that the only reason the document was written because he was gone. But they bothered him until the end of his life. They bothered him to the end of his life. That's the story. And the Mitteler Rebbe felt very, very invaded, and he was. And it gave the Mitteler Rebbe the mindset which you have in Chumash, in Pashas Miketz, Lama Tisro. You know what Lama Tisro means? Yankov Avinu says to his children, Lama Tisro. There was a hunger. Nobody had any food, but Yankov's family did have food. And Yankov says to his children, Lama Tisro, why should we show off? Why should we look different than everybody else? And that's why he sent it to Mitzrayim to buy food, even though you still had food. The Mitteler Rebbe decided that part of the reason Lubavitch is suffering so much, because Lubavitch was so showy. And it was, and I'm going to explain this to you soon. So he began to withdraw a lot of the right word is the culture Chabad Hasidus had a beautiful culture, beautiful form, that peaked by the Mitteler Rebbe. And because of this arrest and liberation, the Mitteler Rebbe already made this decision. Tzemach Tzedek took it to an extreme, that Chabad needs to be low-key. You can't be as beautiful as you could be, because the government gets jealous and they start to poke into your affairs. It's better they shouldn't listen. They shouldn't mix in. Now, of course, first of all, the story goes, let me just finish this story, that he was in Petersburg just for a few weeks. How to know exactly how many? In Petersburg for a few weeks. I have till what time? 25. What time was it now? 13. He was in Petersburg for a few weeks, and then you let him go, but even after they let him go, the trial really, the mixing into his affairs continued. So the story was like this. When he was in Petersburg, he wasn't held in a prison. He wasn't like the Alter Rebbe. He was held in a case, in a dungeon, in a cage. He was helping government apartments, very comfortable government apartments. And he said he needs to have a chassidim. He needs to have a chassidim. Why? He needs a minyan. He needs to say chassidus. So while he was being held, he could have a minyan 3 times every day with, I think, 30 men at each minyan. Shachas, mincha, and ma'ariv. And 3 times a week, he could say chassidus for 50 people. The Mitteler Rebbe said chassidus on It was non-stop. No Rebbe said chassidus like the Mitteler Rebbe. 50 people could come. So a lot of the chassidim, the Alter Rebbe Chassidim came to Vitebsk and they were there during the trial. They probably sat in the court, which also made people very nervous, you know. So the end of the story was, it was Shabbos. Shabbos was Tes Kislev. And the Mitteler Rebbe was saying a maimer, which we know what the maimer's name is. In fact, a lot of people hold, the Rebbe sort of indicates, that we actually have that maimer. The maimer begins with the pasuk from the mincha davening of Shabbos. Ata echad v'shimcha echad mich amcha ki Yisrael goy echad baretz. In Shabbos and Yom Tif, we have 7 brachas. The middle bracha is called Kedusha, the Kiddush of Shabbos. So Yom Tif, all the Kedushas are the same. Ma'ariv, Shachris, even Musaf, and Mincha starts the same way. Ata v'chatanim v'kol ha'amim. B'titam lanu, Yalav Yaveh, and V'hasiyenu. Shabbos, each Kiddush is different. Friday night we say Ata Kidashta. Shabbos morning we say Yismach Moshe. By Musaf we say Tikanta Shabbos. And by Mincha we say Ata Echad. So the Mitteler was saying Chassidus on Ata Echad. In the middle of the Chassidus, they walked in to tell him that he's free to go. But he was saying Chassidus, and when the Mitteler Rebbe's Chassidus said Chassidus, not only was he in another world, his Chassidim were not there, they were in a different world. So the people from the state who came in to tell him he's free walked out. By the time he finished saying the Chassidus, Shabbos was over, and it was Yud. So Matzai Shabbos, the Mitteler Rebbe was told, the case is closed, you can go home. So it turns out that because he was saying Chassidus, there was a delay in telling him the besura of his verdict. In other words, under different circumstances, the Mitteler Rebbe would have been born Tes Kislev, would have passed away Tes Kislev, and his Chag HaGeula would have been Tes Kislev, just like the Frierdiker Rebbe's Chag HaGeula is on his birthday in Beis Tammuz. The pilot was delayed till Yud Kislev, and that's why the Chag HaGeula of the Mitteler Rebbe is Yud Kislev. And to put it to you in plain words, Yud Kislev is the same as Yud Tes Kislev, and Beis Tammuz, and Chamisha B'Tevis, Hey Tevis. Tes Kislev is not. It's not considered the Chag HaGeula because they didn't tell him that he's free till the next day. Yud Kislev we don't say Tachnun, Yud Kislev we are Kapota. Yud Kislev is a Chag HaGeula. The question becomes, however, why we don't make such a big Yom Tov out of Yud Kislev out of Yud Tes Kislev. Yud Kislev was a big Yom Tov, such a big party. How come Yud Kislev seems to be so low key? And the answer, the way we understand it, is because the Mitteler Rebbe Posher did not live to celebrate it. He was released from prison. He was let go home. So the next year the Chassidim wanted to make a party. But unfortunately, it would never happen during his lifetime. He would not have an opportunity to celebrate Yud Kislev after he passed away. So it's sort of anticlimactic. It didn't become the Yom Tov it could have become because of the stalkers of the Mitteler Rebbe. I saw in one Rishima someplace where the Mitteler Rebbe said once, the Mitteler Rebbe said that Avraham Avinu was given 2 choices. Are you familiar with this medrash? Avraham was given 2 choices. When Avraham was told by the Eibishter that his children were going to be Hashem's children, was given 2 choices. One choice is that they can go into Golus, into exile, and the other choice is that they can go to Gehenna to suffer. And Avraham Avinu chose Golus, so he went to Mitzrayim. So the Mitteler Rebbe said Avraham Avinu was given 2 choices, either go into Golus or to pass away. The Tata at Fazich Genumen Golus, my father took for himself Golus, he went to jail. Upon him as Familie is geblieben the zweite Bride. Evidently for me was left the second choice. The second choice was that he should pass away, and that's what happened. But here are the details. The rumor always was, and the previous Rebbe even writes this, that the Mitteler Rebbe was released from prison, Yud Kislev Tov Kuf Pei Zayin, that would be 1826. And he would pass away the next year, the day before, Tes Kislev Tov Kuf Pei Ches, 1827. But the previous Rebbe actually told the Rebbe that we're not sure. We're not sure, was the Mitteler Rebbe released from prison 1 year before he passed away, or was he released from prison 2 years before he passed away? Why? Because both the year before he passed away and 2 years before he passed away, the kviyas of the Yemei HaShavua, the Yemei HaChodesh is the same. Tes Kislev is Shabbos and Yud Kislev is Sunday. In the Rebbe's journal, which is now printed, you see the Rebbe does the math according to the Hebrew calendar to prove that those 2 years in succession, Tes Kislev was Shabbos and Yud Kislev was Sunday. They found these documents 30 something years ago, and the documents show clearly that the Mitteler Rebbe was released from prison not 1 year before he passed away, but 2 years. Which now creates the question, if he passed away, if he lived 2 years after he was released from prison, why didn't Yud Kislev become a Yom Tov the year in between? If he was released in 1825 and he passed away in 1827, why in 1826, which is Tov Kuf Pei Zayin, was there no big Yom Tov made out of Yud Kislev? And the answer to that question is, because he wasn't really free. They let him go. But they didn't let him go. They were holding on to him. The Russian government was holding on to Mitteler Rebbe with dishes. You should know the following. The Lubavitcher Rabbeim, the Frierdiker told us to the Rebbe, it's in the Rebbe's journal, which is now published. The Lubavitcher Rabbeim were officially recognized by the government as an honorable mishpach. The Tzemach Tzedek, the third Lubavitcher Rebbe, had a citation from the king of Russia, from the Tsar himself, that Lubavitcher Rebbe's, the Shneerste Mishpacha, is called Ezrach L'nichbad Deriseyim. That means honorable citizens forever. As long as there would be a king, a monarchy in Russia, the Lubavitcher Rabbeim were considered special citizens. Ezrach Nichbad Deriseyim. After the Alter Rebbe helped Alexander, the Alter Rebbe helped the Russians win the war. Alexander, who was a king in Russia, was an anti-Semite, he wasn't the biggest anti-Semite, but was anti-Semite, gave the Alter Rebbe a similar citation that he's an honorable citizen. And the Frierdiker Rebbe says to the Rebbe, our Rebbe, they gave us a lot of honor, but we never felt safe. It was a show. On the outside, the Jews has a great respect, but they always were looking at us, and any day they could turn on us. In other words, they never felt secure. The Russian government, the Russians are paranoid people. Anybody who has any power, they were afraid. The Rabbeim had power. The Alter Rebbe had real power. The Mitteler Rebbe had real power. Chassidim were very loyal, and they were worried about that power. So although on the outside they gave the Rabbeim much respect, behind it all it was nicht hazeh gishmak. So although he was released from prison 2 years before he passed away, he never got to celebrate it because it wasn't over. His case was not finished until he passed away. And it's possible that had he not passed away, the case would have continued. So there is this parsha of the Mitteler Rebbe suffering because of this arrest. In other words, it never really finished. In addition, the Mitteler Rebbe at the end of his life got sick. He was not well. He lived only 54 years, but at the end of his life he got sick. I don't know how much more before he passed away he got sick, and I don't know the details of it, but at the end of his life the Mitteler Rebbe wasn't well. And what's interesting is, the Mitteler Rebbe's relationship with the Tzemach Tzedek was very similar to the Frierdiker Rebbe's relationship with our Rebbe. Right? What do our Rebbe and the Tzemach Tzedek have in common? Number one, their names are both Menachem Mendel. Number two, their wives are both Chaya Mushka. Number three, they're both the son-in-law of the earlier Rebbe and not a son. Tzemach Tzedek was the Mitteler Rebbe's nephew, and he was married to his daughter, son-in-law. And the Rebbe, the Gezunz, and our Rebbe is the son-in-law of the Frierdiker Rebbe. And both of them, both the Tzemach Tzedek and our Rebbe, stayed away. They didn't want to be involved. When the Mitteler Rebbe was a Rebbe, when the Frierdiker Rebbe was a Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek and the Rebbe, our Rebbe, didn't want to be close. Why? They wanted to do their own thing. They wanted to learn in daven. Tzemach Tzedek didn't want to live in Lubavitch. He did not want to live in Lubavitch. He said to the Mitteler, if I live in Lubavitch, you're going to put me to work. I want to be my own man. I want to learn in daven. I want my own circle. And the Mitteler said, please come live in Lubavitch. I promise you I will not bother you. The Rebbe lived away from the Frierdiker Rebbe for 13 years in Berlin and in Paris for all kinds of reasons. And one of the reasons is, we know this from documents, if you be near the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe put him to work and he wanted to learn in daven. But when the Rebbe the Shver, when the Rebbe the father-in-law became ill, both the Tzemach Tzedek and our Rebbe literally held the hand of their Shver. The last years of the Mitteler Rebbe's life, the Tzemach Tzedek stopped thinking about himself in his own alternative idea. He became, the Friedrich Rebbe writes in one place, it was like two kings sharing one crown. The Tzemach Tzedek helped the Mitteler Rebbe completely. And of course, our Rebbe in America held the hand of the Friedrich Rebbe, and for those 10 years where the Friedrich Rebbe was so physically limited, the Friedrich Rebbe was able to do the things that he did here in America the way he did them only because of our Rebbe. So the last couple of years by the Mitteler Rebbe and the last 10 years by the Friedrich Rebbe, their son-in-law, the Rebbe de Edim, the Rebbe to be, and their son-in-law literally held the hands of their Shver, and Moshe Yadav Dechadi, everything the Mitteler Rebbe did the last years of his life, everything the Friedrich Rebbe did, he did with the help of his father-in-law. And there's an interesting little vart, and it's not a little vart, it's just a short vart, that our Rebbe said to the Friedrich Rebbe. He once asked the Friedrich Rebbe, it's in his diary, he actually read it by Fabrengen. Could you say about the Tzemach Tzedek in the last years of the Mitteler Rebbe that it's two kings sharing one crown? That was the expression. Can you say that the last few years of the Mitteler Rebbe's life, the Tzemach Tzedek and the Mitteler Rebbe were sharing one crown? Now I want to tell you what I think. I think the Rebbe was not asking a historic question. He was asking a personal question. He said to Friedrich Rebbe, can you say that you and I are two kings sharing one crown? He asked a question about the Tzemach Tzedek and the Mitteler Rebbe, but personally, you can not take me personally seriously, but I take myself unfortunately too seriously. I believe that Rebbe was asking, could you say about him, that since he's so close to the Friedrich Rebbe and everything the Friedrich Rebbe is doing is through him, can you say that it's two kings sharing one crown? And the Friedrich Rebbe answered the Rebbe these words, Vos redst du? A Rebbe is not einer. What are you saying? Like, it's ridiculous. There's only one Rebbe. As sick as the Mitteler Rebbe may have been, and as dependent he was on the Tzemach Tzedek, Kozmad, the Mitteler Rebbe was alive, it was the Mitteler Rebbe. The Rega after the Stakas of the Mitteler Rebbe was Tzemach Tzedek. And again, my assumption is that if this question was being asked by the Rebbe personally, this was the answer the Friedrich Rebbe gave him. There's every generation has one spokesperson, one Rebbe, one Nasi Yisrael. And the Tzemach Tzedek helped the Mitteler Rebbe, the Rebbe helped the Friedrich Rebbe, but there's ein Malchus Negas Bechavata Afilik Chut Ashayra. The Gemara says one kingship does not touch a kingship, even like the breath of a hair. When one Rebbe passes away, Istach. What's the lashon of the pasuk? That when the when one sun sets, immediately the other sun rises. So the Mitteler Rebbe was ill at the end of his life. But he was somehow saying Chassidus like forever. The last years of Mitteler Rebbe's life were complete chaos. The 1 year he said so much Chassidus, they had no time to make hakafas. They made hakafas at the Simchas Torah. It was nonstop. The arrest was a big setback. It was a very big setback. And b'derech hateve, this was enough. But there's another thing, which I spoke to the girls on Monday about, but I'm not going to tell it to you. The Mitteler Rebbe, this is the Gezerah of the Cantonisten. You ever heard of the Cantonists? You know that story? It started at the very end of his life. And the Mitteler Rebbe, he had a very hard life. And he helped a lot of Yidden in a lot of ways. But when this Gezerah came, the Mitteler Rebbe said, Ich kann das nicht. I can't handle this. We actually have a printed maimer from the Mitteler Rebbe that explains the Gezerah. Lahaven inyan lekichas anshe chal b'bnei Yisrael. There's actually a letter from a maimer from the Mitteler Rebbe, which he wrote himself, to explain Al Pi Chasidus the significance of taking Jewish boys into the army for 25 years of service. But he passed away before it came down. He said, I can't, and he passed away. And the story of Mitteler's passing away, I'm going to tell the girls of seminary base on Monday. Good Shabbos to all of you. If anybody wants all